The historical figure of Jesus of Nazareth has been depicted in countless ways across cultures and centuries. While theological focus often centers on his divine nature and teachings, the question of his physical appearance, particularly his ethno-racial identity, remains a subject of scholarly inquiry and popular debate. This presentation aims to explore arguments suggesting that Jesus, based on historical, biblical, and anthropological evidence, was a person of color, specifically of African or Afro-Asiatic descent. Please like, comment, and subscribe. This inquiry is not merely an academic exercise in historical reconstruction. It carries significant implications for understanding the universality of Christian faith, challenging Eurocentric interpretations, and fostering a more inclusive theological perspective. We will approach this topic with an analytical and scholarly lens, examining the available evidence and its interpretations. To understand the likely appearance of Jesus, we must first consider the demographic realities of the Levant during the 1st century CE. This region, situated at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, was a melting pot of diverse populations. The inhabitants of Judea and Galilee were Semitic peoples, whose ancestry traced back to ancient Near Eastern populations. These populations were not homogeneous and exhibited a wide range of phenotypes, often darker skinned than modern European populations. Historical records and archaeological findings indicate significant interaction and intermarriage between peoples from the Arabian Peninsula, North Africa, and the broader Mediterranean basin. The idea of a racially distinct white population in this region during that era is anachronistic and unsupported by historical anthropology. The New Testament offers very few direct descriptions of Jesus' physical appearance. This absence is often interpreted as intentional, shifting focus from his physical form to his spiritual message. However, some passages, when interpreted through a specific lens, are cited as indirect evidence. For instance, the book of Revelation describes a vision of one like a son of man, with hair like wool, white as snow, and feet like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace. While this is a symbolic, apocalyptic vision of the glorified Christ, some scholars argue it draws on imagery that would have been understood as indicative of dark skin and tightly coiled hair, consistent with African features. This interpretation suggests a continuity between the earthly and heavenly Christ. Early Christian art provides another avenue for investigation, though it must be approached with caution regarding historical accuracy. The earliest depictions of Jesus, particularly those found in catacombs and sarcophagi from the Roman Empire, often portray him with features consistent with Mediterranean or Middle Eastern populations. These images typically show him with darker hair and eyes, and a complexion that is not distinctly European. It is important to note that these early depictions predate the widespread Europeanization of Jesus' image. The shift towards portraying Jesus with fair skin, light hair, and blue eyes largely occurred during the European Renaissance. This transformation was influenced by cultural assimilation and the dominant artistic conventions of the time, rather than historical accuracy. The argument for Jesus being a person of color is supported by several academic perspectives. Anthropological studies of ancient Near Eastern populations suggest that the people of Judea would have had skin tones ranging from olive to dark brown, consistent with populations in North Africa and the Middle East today. Genetic studies, while not directly applicable to individuals from 2 millennia ago, generally support the idea of a diverse, non-European genetic heritage for the region's ancient inhabitants. Counterarguments often emphasize the lack of explicit biblical descriptions or the symbolic nature of passages like Revelation. Some scholars argue that focusing on race distracts from Jesus' universal message. However, proponents contend that acknowledging Jesus' likely ethno-racial identity enhances his universality by challenging the dominant Eurocentric narrative and making him more relatable to diverse global populations. The question of Jesus' ethno-racial identity holds profound theological and social significance. For many, particularly within Black liberation theology and other non-European Christian traditions, the idea of a Black Jesus is empowering. It challenges the historical use of a white Jesus to justify colonialism, slavery, and racial oppression. Recognizing Jesus as a person of color can foster a deeper sense of belonging and representation for marginalized communities within Christianity. It underscores the idea that God's incarnation was not limited to a specific racial archetype, but embraced the full spectrum of human diversity. This perspective encourages a more inclusive and globally relevant understanding of Christian faith. In conclusion, while definitive photographic evidence of Jesus' appearance is impossible, a compelling academic argument can be made for Jesus being a person of color. This argument is rooted in the historical demographics of the first century Levant, interpretations of subtle biblical cues, and the evolution of Christian iconography. It challenges the pervasive Eurocentric portrayal that has dominated Western art and theology for centuries. Embracing the likelihood of Jesus as a non-European figure is not about diminishing his divine nature or universal message. Rather, it is about reclaiming a more historically accurate and globally inclusive understanding of the Christ. This reevaluation enriches theological discourse, promotes racial justice, and allows diverse communities to see themselves reflected in the very image of their Savior.